You can live in a city of 100,000 people. You can write in a script no European civilization understood. You can know the date of every solar eclipse 1,000 years into the future. You can count in a mathematical system that uses the concept of zero, 500 years before any European thinks of it. You can build pyramids aligned with the rise of Venus on specific calendar days. Your kings can carve their names into stone, and stone can outlast everything. And one day, your civilization can simply stop. Stop carving the names, stop building, stop being a recognizable civilization at all. The libraries empty, the plazas grow grass, the roads disappear under vines. The people who were the Maya do not all die, but the Maya, as a literate, monumental, recordable civilization, vanish. And nobody outside notices for 900 years. When Spanish conquistadors arrived in the early 1500s, they did not find a civilization at its peak. They found people whose own ancestors had lived in cities they could no longer read about. The stone inscriptions carved by their great-great-great-grandfathers were silent to them. The Spaniards assumed the abandoned pyramids hidden in the jungle must have been built by some forgotten biblical race. They could not believe these were the works of the people standing in front of them. This is the story of the largest civilizational disappearance in the Americas. A society of millions. Gone. Not from a single war, not from a single plague, from something far worse and far closer to home for us. To understand the loss, you have to understand the scale. The Maya civilization stretched across what is now southern Mexico, Guatemala, Belize, and Honduras, an area about the size of Italy, or roughly half the size of Texas. At its height, between about 250 and 800 AD, this region held an estimated 40 to 60 million people. That number is not from old textbooks. It comes from a single technology that did not exist 20 years ago: airborne LiDAR scanning, which we will return to at the end of this story. They had mathematics with the concept of zero, 500 years before Europeans got the idea from India. They had astronomy more accurate than Renaissance Europe. Their 365-day solar calendar had an annual error of about a 50,000th of a day, more precise than the calendar Europe was using in the 1700s. They had a true writing system, a real script with grammar and verbs, not just pictograms. They had two superpowers: the city of Tikal in modern Guatemala and the city of Calakmul in modern Mexico, locked in a 200-year rivalry, the way Athens and Sparta fought. They had a king at Palenque named Kinich Janab Pakal, whose tomb was so elaborate that when it was finally opened in 1952, archaeologists found a jade burial mask, a sarcophagus carved with a portrait of him descending into the underworld, and stone slabs documenting his lineage back to mythical ancestors. He ruled for 68 years. He died in 683 AD. His descendants would still be carving stele in Palenque a century later, but only just. And like the people of Bronze Age Ugarit, the Maya thought they would last forever. The first warning came not from a battle, but from the lake mud. In the late 1990s, climate scientists began drilling sediment cores from Lake Chichancanab in the northern Yucatan. Each layer of mud, going down, was a year of the lake's existence, and locked in each layer were the chemical signatures of the rainfall that filled the lake that year. The cores let scientists read 1,500 years of climate, 1 millimeter at a time. What the cores showed was uncomfortable. Starting around 750 AD, rainfall across the Maya lowlands began declining. Not abruptly, slowly at first. Then, in a series of severe drought pulses around 820, 860, and 910 AD, the rains failed catastrophically. The worst pulses are estimated to have reduced annual rainfall by 40 to 70%. Imagine your normal annual precipitation. Then imagine more than half of it simply not arriving, for years in a row. For most civilizations, this would be uncomfortable. For the Maya, it was civilizational suicide. There are almost no large rivers in the southern Maya lowlands. Their water came almost entirely from cenotes, natural limestone sinkholes, and from reservoirs they had carved into the bedrock under their own cities. Reservoirs work only if the rains refill them. When the rain stopped, the reservoirs dried, the cenotes dropped. The cornfields, which depended on summer rain to grow the staple maize crop, simply failed. By the year 820 AD, several southern cities, including Quiriguá and Caracol, were already showing signs of collapse. Stela were being carved less often. Population was dropping. Royal courts were quietly relocating. And then the second blow arrived. The second blow was not natural. It was the cascade that follows when food becomes scarce in any sophisticated society. People migrate, trade routes break, and rival cities, now competing for the same shrinking resources, go to war. Maya warfare of the 8th and 9th centuries became unrecognizable from what came before. Earlier Maya wars had been ritualized, fought between elite warriors for prestige and prisoners. The wars of the collapse era were total. Cities were burned. Royal families were executed. Populations fled into the forest. The greatest single drama unfolded between the two superpowers. Tikal and Calakmul had fought for 2 centuries by the time the collapse began. In 695 AD, Tikal's king, Jasaw Chan K'awiil I, had defeated Calakmul in battle and captured its ruler. For nearly a century afterward, Tikal flourished. But by the time of his great-great-grandson, Jasaw Chan K'awiil II, the climate had turned. The reservoirs were emptier each year. The maize harvests were failing. In the year 869 AD, Jasaw Chan K'awiil II carved Stela 11 at Tikal. It is a tall stone slab, carved with his portrait and the date of its dedication. He was recording, as Maya kings had been recording for 600 years, that he existed, and that this was the day he was alive. It is the last dated monument ever carved at Tikal. After that, silence. Within a century of that single stela, the population of Tikal would drop by 90%. A city that had once held nearly 100,000 people would be reduced to a few thousand farmers living in the ruins of their grandparents' city, no longer able to read what was written on the stones around them. Calakmul lasted a little longer. Its last dated monument is a stela from 899 AD. After that, silence at Calakmul too. The very last classical Maya monument anywhere in the southern lowlands was carved at the city of Tonina in modern Chiapas, on a date corresponding to January 18th, 909 AD. After January 909, the classic Maya stopped writing their own history. The pattern of decline was not random. Archaeologists call it the stela horizon, a line you can draw across a map showing the last carved date in each city. The line moves from southwest to northeast across the lowlands, decade by decade. Cities in the south stopped first, in the 800s. The center stopped next, in the 830s through 880s. The last classical inscription anywhere fell in 909. After that, the silence is almost total. The population of the southern Maya lowlands collapsed by an estimated 90% within a century. Cities that had held tens of thousands of people emptied. Royal courts dissolved. The literate priesthood, the scribes, calendar keepers, astronomers, disappeared first, because they were a luxury class whose entire role depended on a centralized state that could no longer feed them. The descendants who survived were villagers and farmers. They could no longer read their grandfather's stones. The Maya did not all die, far from it. Their language survives today and is spoken by about 6 million people across Mexico and Central America. But the civilization of cities, of inscriptions, of mathematical astronomy and monumental kings, that civilization simply ended. The jungle moved back in. Within 2 centuries, the great cities were covered by canopy. Within 5 centuries, even the largest pyramids were tree-grown hills that locals walked past without recognizing. When Spanish conquistadors arrived in the 1500s, some of them did stumble across abandoned cities in the forest. But they assumed these were the works of some lost race, perhaps the lost tribes of Israel, or perhaps Egyptians who had somehow crossed the ocean. They could not believe that the people they had just conquered were the heirs of these stones. Even the Maya descendants themselves no longer fully knew. For 500 years after the conquest, the world's understanding of the Maya was based on what could be seen from the ground. Pyramids that broke the canopy, a few inscriptions that explorers happened to read, a patchwork picture, deeply underestimated. Then came LiDAR. In February 2018, a research consortium called the Pakunam LiDAR Initiative, working with archaeologists from Tulane University and Brown, published the first comprehensive aerial laser survey of northern Guatemala. They had flown laser scanners over more than 800 square miles, about 2,000 square kilometers, of jungle. The lasers cut through the canopy and mapped the ground below at a resolution no archaeologist had ever seen. The findings rewrote the field. 60,000 previously unknown structures, roads, cities, pyramids, causeways stretching for hundreds of kilometers, between 60 and 120 miles in some networks, linking cities the world had not known were linked. Defensive earthworks suggesting that the warfare of the collapse era had been even more total than the documentary record suggested. Vast networks of agricultural terraces, revealing that the lowlands had been almost entirely cleared, drained, and farmed. The Maya had not lived lightly in the jungle. They had been a continuous, densely packed urban civilization that had reshaped the entire landscape to feed its cities. The population estimate was revised upward by a factor of 3 to 4. The civilization had been 40 to 60 million people at its peak, not the 10 million previously assumed. And this meant something cold. When the rains failed, there was no fallback. The forest was no longer there to retreat into. The soil was exhausted from centuries of intensive farming. The interconnected economy of cities meant that when one fell, the next was forced to absorb refugees it could not feed. The literate state collapsed because its tax base, the farmers, could no longer produce a surplus. The cascade was total, because the system was total. Just like Bronze Age Ugarit, just like the empires of the year 536, just like every interconnected civilization that has ever assumed its reigns would continue to arrive. Here is the part that should make you pause. The Maya were not primitive. They were not unlucky. They were the most sophisticated civilization in the pre-Columbian Americas. Astronomers, mathematicians, urban planners, statesmen. They fell because their food, their water, and their interconnected economy all depended on a single rainfall pattern they assumed would last. It did not. The cause was not the drought alone. It was the cascade. Drought triggered crop failure. Crop failure triggered migration. Migration triggered war. War broke the trade and tribute system that fed the central cities. The cities fell one after another. And the literate class, the priests, the scribes, the keepers of the calendar, was the first to disappear, because it depended entirely on the courts that could no longer feed it. By the time anyone realized what was happening, no one was left who knew how to write it down. The American Southwest is in a megadrought today. The the worst in 1,200 years, according to research from UCLA and Columbia. Lake Powell and Lake Mead, the two largest reservoirs in the United States, are at the lowest levels since they were first filled. Our wheat comes from a small handful of regions: the American Midwest, the Ukrainian Plain, the Indian breadbaskets. Our cities run on water systems that work because the climate of the last century has been unusually stable. None of this is permanent. The Maya assumed their rains would come. The kings of Ugarit assumed help was coming across the sea. The Romans of 536 assumed the sun would rise tomorrow as bright as it rose yesterday. None of them were right. When archaeologists in 3,000 years use whatever LiDAR has evolved into to scan the ruins under whatever forest has reclaimed our cities, they will find something. And they will wonder, exactly as we do now, looking at the silent stones of Tikal, what did these people think was going to happen?